Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take your source material, the foundational stories, the documents, the radical ideas, and really focus on the insights that matter.
Today, we're embarking on a pretty massive chronological journey.
We really are. We're tracking the essential figures who define the United States, starting from, well, the very moment the continent was open to European colonization.
And we're carrying that all the way through to the huge geographic expansion of the early 1800s.
This deep dive is specifically designed for you, the listener, to sort of connect the dots.
Exactly. We're not just, listing names from a textbook. Our mission is to understand why each person became a catalyst.
Right, whether they changed government or philosophy or just the physical map of the nation itself.
We're following the DNA of self-government, civil liberties, and, well, American ambition.
It's a spectacular stretch of history. We're going to trace how these really radical ideas about religious tolerance in the 1630s
Yeah.
somehow end up dictating America's foreign policy 200 years later.
It's the ultimate lesson in cause and effect. It really is.
Okay, let's unpack this.
So if we're tracking the story of the United States,
Mm-hmm.
we have to start somewhere.
And that starting point for European involvement, you just can't get around it, is Christopher Columbus.
He is the spark. He lights the entire fuse. Our sources all confirm that when he sailed for Spain in 1492 and landed in the Caribbean, his voyages initiated this monumental process.
And he wasn't even looking for North America.
Not at all. But he opened the door to European exploration, to colonization, and the eventual cultural exchange or, collision that shaped everything that came after. He begins that foundational era of change for everyone involved.
But the real, the intellectual seeds of American liberty, the ideas that actually define the nation, they were planted later.
Much later, yeah.
Yeah.
In the colonial era by people fighting against the existing authority.
Let's start with a really revolutionary voice in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, Anne Hutchinson.
Hutchinson is fascinating. She's challenging the state-sanctioned church leadership directly. She held these unauthorized religious meetings in her home.
Which was a huge deal back then.
A huge deal. She criticized the Puritan ministers, arguing that faith should be a direct, personal experience, not dictated by the government. And the leaders, well, they did not like her independence.
So they banished her.
They banished her, exactly. So her contribution wasn't founding a colony or writing a document. It was pushing that philosophical envelope.
She pushed the limits of authority.
Precisely. Her actions, even though she was penalized for them, helped pioneer this idea that people should have the freedom to speak and worship without, fear of government punishment.
And then you have someone who takes that idea and turns it into an actual governmental reality, Roger Williams.
Williams takes that idea of freedom and just runs with it. He insisted government should never force religion on its citizens.
Yeah.
He was another Puritan troublemaker who got kicked out.
A common theme.
A very common theme. But he goes on to found Rhode Island, specifically on these principles of complete religious freedom and the separation of church and state. If you're looking for the original American aha moment that grows into the First Amendment,
Is it?
Williams is the essential seed.
And we see that same need for structure, for limitations on power being written down by Thomas Hooker.
Right, in Connecticut.
Yeah.
He helped draft the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut.
Which is so important.
It's hugely important because it formalized self-government.
Hmm.
What our sources stress is that it was one of North America's first written constitutions. But its real significance was its democratic spirit. It set this precedent that voting and government participation didn't require you to be a member of the church,
It basically said government has to be written down, and it gets its power from the consent of the people.
regardless of their piety, yes. And then you have William Penn creating Pennsylvania for the Quakers,
Another working model.
a working model for future governance. He based it on tolerance, fairness, and a really functional representative government. He proved these liberal ideas weren't just, philosophical concepts. They could be the operating system for a successful society.
Okay, so before we get to the battlefields of the revolution, we have to talk about the man who provided the intellectual cannon fire for the whole thing, John Locke.
Locke is, it's fascinating because he's an English Enlightenment philosopher, but he codified the language of the American Revolution.
Well, laid it all out.
He did. His core arguments were that all individuals have natural rights, life, liberty, and property, and that governments only exist because people consent to them.
And if the government breaks that contract,
Then the people have the right to change it.
and the connection to our founding documents isn't subtle at all, is it? It's almost plagiarized.
It is a direct, unmistakable link. Locke's concepts especially that idea of natural rights. They appear almost word for word, just paraphrased by Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence, without Locke.
What is the revolution?
It's just an armed tax dispute. He provided the philosophical justification.
Okay, so moving into the Revolutionary Era, we need two key figures to set the stage: the symbol of the regime and the man who held the army together.
King George III. He became the undisputed face of tyranny for the colonists. After the French and Indian War, Parliament enacted all these taxes and measures.
No taxation without representation.
That's the one. The colonists felt it violated their fundamental rights as Englishmen. The king's refusal to compromise became this ironic, unifying factor. His stubbornness is what forced all these different colonies to realize they shared a common enemy.
And standing against him was General George Washington.
Washington's military record, our sources make it really clear, it wasn't defined by, brilliant battlefield victories. It was about sheer endurance, leadership.
Holding it all together.
Exactly. His greatest contribution was holding the Continental Army together, especially during that horrific winter at Valley Forge. He stopped the whole military from just dissolving into mutiny or desertion. He made sure there was an army left to fight. He was the anchor.
So while Washington fought the tactical war, Thomas Jefferson was fighting the intellectual one.
Jefferson is the great synthesizer. He took all the colonists' specific complaints against King George, he organized them, and he transformed what was a local protest into this formal declaration of universal human rights.
Thusifying independence to the entire world.
To the world, yes.
But you needed the firebrands, right, the people to rally the public, and that was Patrick Henry.
Oh, absolutely. Henry was the voice of pure emotional resistance. His famous demand, "Give me liberty or give me death," that was the rallying cry. It helped push the colonies toward that irreversible step of independence before the war had even officially started.
But determination and words aren't enough. The Americans were outmatched. They desperately needed help.
And the diplomat who made that happen was Benjamin Franklin. Franklin's genius was in leveraging American success, specifically that huge victory at Saratoga, to get a critical alliance with France.
Which was everything.
It was everything. The sources emphasize this again and again. Without French money, ships, and thousands of troops, the revolution probably fails. Franklin won the war with diplomacy.
And speaking of determination, the Navy needed a symbol. John Paul Jones.
You gave him one. He was the naval hero, the embodiment of American defiance. Commanding the Bonhomme Richard, his ship is damaged, it's sinking, and he refuses to surrender.
I have not yet begun to fight.
The immortal line. It became this perfect piece of propaganda for determination across the colonies.
And that foreign assistance also came from people on the ground, like the Marquis de Lafayette.
Lafayette was this young French nobleman who he saw the American cause as noble and volunteered. He had Washington-trained soldiers strengthen that bond with France. Washington saw him almost as an adopted son.
We also have to recognize that this fight for rights went way beyond the, white male political elite. We have to mention Crispus Attucks.
Attucks is tragically significant. He was the first person killed in the Boston Massacre.
Which makes him arguably the first casualty of the revolution.
It does. And his death was immediately used as powerful propaganda against the tyranny of British occupation. It galvanized the resistance.
And while the war was raging, Abigail Adams was demanding that those revolutionary ideals be applied universally.
She wrote these vital letters to her husband, John, urging him to remember the ladies as they were building the new government.
She was pointing out the hypocrisy.
Clearly, the hypocrisy of fighting for liberty while denying it to half the population. She's one of the earliest, most articulate voices for women's rights in the new nation.
Here's where it gets really interesting. They won the war. But the transition from fighting a king to building a functioning republic, that was even harder.
Oh, much harder. And that story begins with James Madison, the father of the Constitution. He showed up at the convention prepared. He brought the Virginia Plan, which became the basis for the government structure.
And he took notes.
He kept detailed notes of everything, which are just invaluable to historians today. But his work didn't stop there. The opposition to the Constitution was fierce.
Right, from the anti-federalists, like George Mason.
Mason was instrumental. He was a key anti-federalist who refused to sign the Constitution because it didn't have a Bill of Rights. The pressure he and others applied led directly to Madison writing the Bill of Rights,
ensuring those freedoms like speech and religion were protected.
the very freedoms the Puritans had tried to stamp out a century and a half earlier. It all comes full circle.
So Madison gives us the structure and the rights. Who was pushing for the power? That would have to be Alexander Hamilton.
Hamilton. the chief advocate for a strong, centralized national government. He wrote the overwhelming majority of the Federalist Papers, arguing for ratification. His influence on the early economic and government structure was just immense.
So it's ratified. Washington becomes president. And this is where the real framework, the precedents, get set.
Washington's whole administration was like an ongoing constitutional convention. He set the tone for everything, serving only 2 terms, the role of the cabinet, the title Mr. President,
And foreign policy.
a policy of neutrality. In his farewell address, he famously warned against political parties and permanent foreign alliances, advice that defined American diplomacy for decades.
Then the second president, John Adams, he immediately runs into a huge controversy over civil liberties.
He does. He's facing this conflict with France, the XYZ affair. And in response, his administration passes the Alien and Sedition Acts.
And the Sedition Act in particular.
It made it a crime to criticize the government. It was the first major constitutional crisis over free speech, sparking this immediate heated debate about security versus liberty.
Moving on to Thomas Jefferson's presidency, this is where the physical scope of the country just explodes.
Dramatically. As the 3rd president, Jefferson makes the Louisiana Purchase from France in 1803. This act it doubled the size of the United States overnight. A monumental decision.
It opened the floodgates to westward expansion.
And established a continental destiny for the nation. It completely changed the game.
After him, his successor, James Madison, the father of the Constitution, is president during the War of 1812.
And the main cause there was Britain's practice of impressing American sailors.
Kidnapping them, basically.
Kidnapping American citizens and forcing them into the British Navy. Madison leads the nation through this second war with Britain, and the success fosters this intense new sense of American national pride. It confirmed the nation's independence once and for all.
And the final figure defining the scope of this early republic is James Monroe.
Monroe defined America's relationship with the rest of the world for, well, nearly 2 centuries with the Monroe Doctrine. In 1823, it explicitly told European nations to stop all colonization or interference in the Western Hemisphere.
It basically established the U.S. as the dominant power in its own neighborhood.
It was the foundation of U.S. foreign policy for a very, very long time.
That focus on boundaries brings us to our last segment, defining the actual map. The Louisiana Purchase was made, but someone had to go explore it.
And Jefferson chose Lewis and Clark to lead the Corps of Discovery. Their mission was immense. Map the territory, document plants and animals, and find a route to the Pacific.
And their journey inspired everyone who came after.
It did. It provided the practical knowledge necessary for that future migration.
But their success was, it was completely tied to the contributions of Sacagawea.
Her role as the Shoshone woman on the expedition was vital. For survival and for diplomacy, she was an interpreter, a guide. But critically, her presence, a woman traveling with a child, often signaled to the native tribes they met that the expedition was peaceful.
It smoothed the way.
It absolutely did. It helped the group move safely through totally unfamiliar territory.
So if we synthesize this whole deep dive, we start with people like Roger Williams, Anne Hutchinson, George Mason, all fighting for these abstract but foundational rights.
Right. Religious freedom, free speech, a written government.
And then once those principles are secured, you see these later figures, Jefferson, Lewis, Clark, dramatically changing the physical reality of the country.
Through immense land acquisition and mapping.
Yeah.
The early figures define the principles of the Republic. The later figures define the space of the Republic. They collectively set the bounds, the structure, and the rights of the nation.
So what does this all mean?
It means the United States was born out of this constant tension. The desire for immense freedom coexisting with immense ambition. Every key individual we discussed was a necessary catalyst.
You needed all of them.
You did. Whether they were providing the philosophy like Locke, or securing an alliance like Franklin, or setting the rules of government like Washington and Madison, you can't have the nation without all 3 of those components.
It's incredible to see that early push for individual freedoms from people like Hutchinson and Williams kind of clash with the massive practical growth like the Louisiana Purchase.
And that leaves us with a provocative thought for you to mull over. Thomas Jefferson, the great champion of limited government and consent, suddenly acquired an immense territory without the consent of the people who were already living there.
So the question is,
did that massive physical expansion across the continent fundamentally contradict the core principles of liberty and limited government that he and James Madison had so painstakingly defined? Think about that tension, between the ideological foundation and that practical geographic growth.